like the eternal city that is Rome, where the ecclesiastical splendor of the Renaissance completely enthralls the imagination. The dome of St. Peter's rises upwards like a heavenly choir. From the topmost pinnacle, the centuries that are Rome spread out in everlasting significance.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this roundtable. We'll be discussing natural theology and the divine attributes. So, welcome to the show, everyone. It's good to have y'all here.
How's it going, man?
Do y'all want to say a little bit about yourselves, or just get right into it?
I guess we can get right into it. I mean, everybody kind of already knows who Hasan is.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. I don't want to I don't want to make it like too, stuffy. Just kind of want to play it loosey goosey,
No time to waste. All right. Natural theology. So what is natural theology?
Yeah. So when it comes to this question, I think honestly this is going to be the most important question. Going right into it. And it's not just because defining terms is always important. It's because there's an aura of negativity surrounding the term that comes from certain corners that would like to, especially orthodoxy. I mean, and then also a term like natural theology. Like, come on, what are you some rationalist? So there's always a sort of negative gloom surrounding the term natural theology. So we have to really nail down exactly what we're talking about. So natural theology, everybody can kind of imagine the sort of etymology or the origin of the word behind it. It comes from God, study, or a word about God, some sort of study surrounding God. And then natural is going to refer to the principle whereby we acquire that knowledge about God, which is going to not be from special revelation, but it's going to be from Scripture. So when it comes to the sort of place of natural theology within philosophy, it's going to be a subset of metaphysics. So metaphysics is the study of being, and then natural theology is going to be the study of the first cause of being, which is going to be God. So it's different from sacred theology, which goes off of revelation, and then it's just generally phased right in there with metaphysics to kind of get our traction right there.
Yeah. So what's the importance of it? Why should we learn about it? Any takers?
Well, one reason is that it's valuable for the task of apologetics. You can appeal to natural reason to establish the preambles of faith, so the existence of God, the possibility of miracles, the possibility of divine revelation, things of that nature. So it's valuable there. With that being said, there are limitations. And so, like Christian was just saying, some people think of rationalism when they think of natural theology. So, for instance, we can't prove that God is a Trinity by natural reason. That's something that has to be revealed to us. You can give plausibility arguments, but they're kind of ex post facto, kind of like, well, okay, it actually does make sense that God will be multi-personal because you think of a perfect expression of love is kind of other-oriented. And so if God's multi-personal, then he can just essentially have that other-oriented love. But even there, that doesn't get you to, he's specifically tri-personal. So that's where we have to pull back away from rationalism, where we don't say that we can demonstrate all of the articles of faith with natural theology, but we can demonstrate the preambles of faith, and we can demonstrate that divine revelation is credible. Yeah, so I guess that I'll hand it off to someone else from there.
Yeah, there's also, I think St. Anselm was actually the perfect example for this. But there's also a value to the contemplation when it comes to specifically the believer contemplating the arguments for the existence of God. I take the view, according with Gilson, which, if you know anything about me, it's crazy that I'm agreeing with Gilson, but that when it comes to St. Anselm's argument that he's actually not presenting something which would be used in an apologetic situation, but actually something that is oriented towards contemplation. The fact that in contemplating the arguments for the existence of God, which is just one part of natural theology, to make that perfectly clear, that in contemplating those arguments for the existence of God, we are able to gain some sort of fruit from it as Catholics who already, by faith, believe in the existence of God, in that according to his nature as Redeemer of mankind and giver of grace.
Yeah. So, what was the origin of natural theology? When did it come about? St. Anselm?
Yeah, well, the history behind it's actually kind of fun, and I actually did a little bit of study into this. So you have really the first sort of thinking about God under its natural aspect, which obviously those who originated it wouldn't have thought like that, would have been the poets of ancient Greece. They kind of those are the first people who were called theologians, sort of oracles and poets and such. And then you get to the time of Aristotle. If you read Aristotle's Metaphysics and his Physics, he is starting to speculatively consider God in that insofar as he is the causer of being, if you want to put it like that in its most general aspect. And then throughout the early church, you had this distinction between what's called theology and economy. You'll get this brought up in Orthodox circles a bit. You can still hear about this. But the distinction between economy and theology is going to be the consideration of God as he is in himself, and then the consideration of God as he is the working outside of himself for the redemption of mankind. That's the distinction you'll get. But the sort of hard and fast distinction between natural theology and sacred theology, this doesn't come around. If memory serves me right, it's about the time of Richard of St. Victor. Is when you start to get this understanding being developed, and then by the time of St. Thomas Aquinas, it's very clear where the lines are drawn when it comes to knowing God under the aspect of being versus knowing God under the intimate aspect of himself, which is going to be sacred theology, which is working not under the natural light of reason, but under revelation.
Mm-hmm. So where do we go from there? How do we dig deeper into the topic?
Yeah, I guess we can kind of discuss how the various different parts of natural theology. So first, you're going to cover the existence of God. And then in the second part, broadly speaking, you're going to talk about the essence and attributes, which is going to be within the attributes, you're going to cover the what are called the entitative attributes. Like you can think of your whiteness or your humanity. Those are entitative attributes. And then you have what John of St. Thomas calls the attributes of passive knowability, which is going to be the knowing and naming of God. And then on the third place, you have what's called the operative attributes, which are going to be attributes which are ordered outwards towards operation. So I guess all I'm meaning to say there is I guess we can just kind of start with the existence of God, broadly speaking.
Mm-hmm. Any thoughts on that, Colin or Hasan? The existence of God, proven by natural theology.
I think Hasan said that he had something about Romans 1.
Yeah, go ahead with it.
Yeah, so
Romans 1:20.
Right. So the Romans 1:20 passage, with respect to what Christian just said, St. Paul is mostly going to be talking about it from a moral perspective and not just this epistemic perspective. he's going to be talking about how it was possible, and some actually did know the existence of God from the things which have been made. And the important thing about this passage is that he wants to then talk about the concept of ignorance and how it renders a non-action inculpable. Then he wants to say that we shouldn't deceive ourselves by pretending that this ignorance is as extensive as it is. And he also wants to talk about how these things, which should have been causes for glorifying and adoring God, became ways to instrumentalize him and to worship the created that signifies rather than the creator signified. And that's gonna lead into some other stuff that maybe I'll talk about later.
Yeah. So I have the verse right there going across the screen. Forever since the world was created, people have seen the earth and sky. Though everything God made, they can clearly see. Through everything God made, they can clearly see His invisible qualities, His eternal power and divine nature. So how can people see His invisible qualities? Or how could the ancients see God's invisible qualities by nature?
Good question. So there's something that St. Augustine is going to reference from the first chapter of the book of Sirach. And he's going to say, wisdom was created before all things, certainly not the wisdom that was clearly co-eternal and equal to you, O Father, and by whom all things were created, John 1:3, in whom as the beginning you created the heavens and the earth. Rather, truly, it was the wisdom that has been created, namely, the intellectual nature that, in the contemplation of light, is light. For this is called wisdom, although it is created, but as great as the difference is between the light, which enlightens, and that which is enlightened. For with you is the fountain of life, in your light do we see light. That's Psalm 36. So great is the difference between the wisdom that creates and that which has been created. It is just as great as the difference between the righteousness that justifies and the righteousness that has been made by justification. So this is a very important passage, and it kind of shows the spiritual use of these doctrines.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I think this actually kind of leads us into the first question that's traditionally brought up when it comes to the discussion of the existence of God, because you asked about, like, through what, how do we go, and how did the ancients know about God? And this gets there's sort of three questions that are usually asked. On the one hand, you have the sort of way that Thomists just do theologies. You have a certain side that's defect by excess, and then you have one that's defect by lack, and then you have the golden mean that arises above the two sides. So first we ask about ontologism, and then on the other side we ask about agnosticism. So on the one side, ask about ontologism, we ask, okay, how does the argument for the existence of God really work? Is it something which is a priori, or is it something which is a posteriori? So is it something which is grasped immediately from the terms? So by the just by the judgment God exists, I can grasp the fact that God exists, or is it something that requires what's called a middle term, a demonstrative middle, that I'm going to have to from a certain reasoning from effect to cause, I'm going to have to draw forth knowledge, an argument for the existence of God.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, that and in the ways that the Thomists end up is arguing that yes, we need to argue from creation to the Creator. That is, arguing from proper effects to proper causes. And this sort of takes place in every human being in a not intuitive, but I guess we could say natural way. That it is natural for man to to gaze upon creation around him, and to have this almost quasi-intuitive reflex response that there must be a God. Sheben writes about this at length. I wish I had the quote in front of me. It's pretty good.
Yeah.
But really, what all we're doing in natural theology is we're taking that reflex right there, and then we're putting it. And I mean, this is kind of all of peripatetic philosophy, generally, broadly speaking. We take that sort of common sense reflex of man, and then we put it in a sort of systematic form. We synthesize really common sense into a philosophical system. So that's really all that natural theology does. Is it takes that reflex response and states in technical terms.
Yeah. To switch directions, I guess, what does the church currently teach about natural theology? Wasn't there a pope that affirmed it, that it's a way to know God?
Yeah. If anybody else wanted to kind of, I'm sure everybody knows about Vatican I here and can explain that.
Yeah. So the First Vatican Council has in De Filius the anathema. If anyone says that the one true God, our Creator and Lord, cannot be known with certainty by the natural light of human reason through the things which have been made, let him be anathema. And then Pope St. Pius X in the Anti-Modernist Oath states, God, the beginning and end of all things, can be known with certainty by the natural light of reason as a cause is known by its effects from those things that are made, that is, by the visible works of creation, and can be equally demonstrated to be. And Ludwig Ott assigns the theological note of sententia fidei proxima to that statement from Pius X. So we get one, natural theology is in principle successful. I mean, the church, at least to my knowledge, has not officially endorsed any specific argument, but the idea that the general project of natural theology is in principle successful is taught by the church. And then in particular, a kind of cosmological argument from causality, that general kind of strategy is in principle successful as well. Yeah.
That's that, and honestly, that makes that sort of makes sense, because for a little bit of historical background to what was going on there in the 19th century. I mean, we all kind of everybody watching, I'm sure, knows and has heard of modernism, but modernism really was a sort of synthesizing project with some continental philosophers in order to make this quite terrible mixture between Catholicism and the philosophy of the day. It turned out quite badly. But when it comes to the existence of God, there were certain philosophers who would say that we actually can't know God from the light of natural reason. They would be, I'm sure everybody's heard of the term agnostic, and that is really what's being condemned here. And weirdly enough, when it comes to modern Eastern Orthodox online figures, they've somehow stumbled into those condemnations, which I don't really know how that works. But I think, but really my intuition right now is that they don't really understand what the word or the concept of natural theology is, because they still will argue from reason, at least man's subjective dependence upon God in our various experiences, which would just be called a physical or a moral argument by some of the philosophical manuals. So it's sort of a weird history behind it, how we have kind of gotten back to the point of weird schizo online Orthodox figures are somehow replicating 19th century modernists who are replicating earlier continental philosophers. So who are also themselves replicating some weird medieval agnostics. So I don't know how we get here, but we get here.
Yeah. So who are some of those main philosophers, the agnostic philosophers that reject theology?
So the main I'm still unconvinced when it comes to exactly how I think about his thought on the subject. So maybe I probably shouldn't talk about it. But the main target of criticism, the main source of inspiration, is going to be Immanuel Kant,
Mm-hmm.
and he and his what is the book title? Maybe one of you guys know. It's the
Critique of
one.
Pure Reason.
Well, yeah, it's the Critique of Pure Reason. Then he has the one successful argument for the existence of God. Something super pretentious like that, like a typical continental philosopher. The only possible argument ever for the existence of God. Like, okay, dude, like nice job. Great book title.
Yes.
Yeah, I read that. I remember reading that in high school, and I thought it was the weirdest thing ever. Let me.
Yeah. So, what are some of the main arguments against natural theology? Like the biggest argument against it?
Yeah. So, here it is. The only possible argument in support of a demonstration of the existence of God. Yeah, nice pithy title, dude. But yeah, when it comes to the arguments against natural theology, really the basis they're going to have to target, there's two of them. The first one is going to be what's called the ontological validity of our first principles. The second is going to be the transcendental validity of our first principles. So the ontological validity of our first principles would be things like the law of non-contradiction. Because once you establish the law of non-contradiction, you're able from that, and then some of these other first principles, to draw out certain attributes of being that would require the existence of God, especially when our experience of being that is contingent, that is being that doesn't have its raison d'etre within itself. So that would be the ontological validity of our first principles, where a lot of the Kantians are going to say that it doesn't have our first principles don't have ontological validity. They kind of have an experimental or experiential validity. We kind of act just like they work. Technically, we can't prove that the law of non-contradiction is real. We just can't conceive of a contradiction, that sort of thing. And then from that, we also have the transcendental validity of our first principles. So where we provide a nice reductio ad absurdum for the fact that, that's kind of ridiculous to say that the law of non-contradiction isn't a law of being, that it's just a law of thought. They will say, well, okay, let me just pretend that I will accept the ontological validity of our first principles. Well, you can't prove that would apply to God. That's actually at least to me, the more interesting one, because I think most of in your sort of common apologetic situations, most of the people you talk to aren't prepared to go full subjectivist when they're interacting with the world. They're going to be like, okay, yeah, actually that tree over there does exist, and that tree is not a dog. Like I know that I can kind of have these basic intuitions when it comes to first principles. But the transcendental validity of our principles, which is the ability to transcend not only created being but also uncreated being, that's a bit of the more interesting objection.
Yeah. Do y'all have anything to add to that, Colin or Hasan?
I could add one quick thing, which is just that you might also get a kind of distinctively theological objection to natural theology. So certain Calvinist circles, kind of in the Van Tillian presuppositionalist camp, will say that natural theology is not possible in a fallen state. Some will say, well, once you're regenerated by grace, then you could successfully reason in that way. But of course, if you're already regenerated, that doesn't have any value apologetically, right? If you already have to be regenerated to see the arguments of natural theology as being sound, that's not going to be apologetically valuable. So that's going to kind of rely on the Calvinist doctrine of total depravity. And so answering that objection essentially just amounts to answering the total depravity.
Yeah, those guys are fun, especially Van Til. Van Til was just as like background lore, because I do come from a Reformed background where I had to deal with Van Tillians. But Van Til, if you read Keith Matheson's article, what was that called? Oh, Van Tillianism in Christianity. It's quite a bombastic title. But yeah, if you Christianity and Vantillianism, August 21st, 2019. But yeah, Van Til, he was full schizo mode. Crap, I can't send comments. But yeah, he would say like, oh, God is at the same time one person and three persons, and one being and three beings. It's like, okay, dude. And he had some sort of weird theory of truth to where this kind of comes from some critiques of some Dutch Reformed thinkers in the 19th century of Thomas Aquinas, but they would somehow think that in order to know the quiddity of something, so the essence of something, you would need to know somehow the coherence of that thing, not only with other beings around you, but its connections with its final end, and then also its first cause, which obviously isn't true. I can know the quiddity of many things without knowing certain proximate ends, and if those proximate ends change, I still know what it is, and it doesn't somehow destroy the essence of the thing. So yeah, that's going to be really along with the noetic effects of sin. That's going to be another leg they stand on, as a weird definition of truth and how we know truth.
Yeah, I find Van Til really fascinating to read because he seems to vacillate a lot, where it's like he's trying to avoid fideism while also trying to reject natural theology, and I actually don't think that can be done. Like he kind of contradicts himself all the time because he's trying to steer a middle course there, and I don't think it could be done.
Yeah, I feel like I remember actually when I started my freshman year in undergrad, and we were studying Prolegomena, and we started discussing some things about fideism. I just kind of looked up, and it was rationalism, fideism, and then sort of the traditional Christian view, because it was the traditional Reformed view, at least. And I remember thinking about fideism, and I had been influenced a little bit. As I said, I was reading a bit of Kant when I was in high school, at least that one work, which probably didn't do much for me. And then also some writings of Van Til and Bonson. And I saw fideism, and I was like, fideism, that doesn't sound too bad. And then I come to realize, at least through some arguments with my professors, that yes, actually, fideism is pretty bad.
I should say as well that not all Calvinists are Van Tillians. There are natural theology supporting Calvinists.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. When it comes to the confessional documents and the traditional theologians, it's not Van Tillian at all. Although, as one of my professors pointed out to me when I was doing, because I study in grad school the history of classical Protestant theology, that there has been this sort of thread going back to the Reformation of weird sort of proto-Van Til leanings, and then there's also this other thread of like what we would basically completely agree upon when it comes to natural theology as Catholics. It's really fascinating to look at this stuff.
So we can go back a step. What's fideism?
You two want to answer?
A simple answer, I guess. We don't have to spend too much time on that.
I'll let Hasan go. He hasn't spoken in a little bit. If you want to go.
Sure. So fideism is just going to amount to the view that we can only come to know the existence of God in any sense other than naming something that we think is God, like St. Thomas says that the Samaritans did in his commentary on John. My bad.
Yeah.
So he's gonna say that basically, like, there are different ways of naming God, and that one of these ways of naming God is naming something that you think is God, but it's not. And he calls what some people have a fantasia of God. But there's still a kind of indirect reference. But the fideist is going to say that it's not possible without the infusion of faith to know something that is God rather than a fantasia in the mind. And we are gonna reject this because of basically the patristic teaching on the spiritual meaning of the water becoming wine. So our natural knowledge of God is able to be elevated into something that gladdens the heart, like wine is supposed to gladden the heart of man. So our kind of like, I guess, kind of like dry or like merely intellectually delighting notion of what God is, which can be true and not a fantasia, but really what God is. We are just going to understand it as completely like unfulfilling in terms of the way that the gospel describes the elevation of man's soul and the bringing of formally things necessary for our sustenance and our general natural well-being, but not bringing gladness to us, not bringing delight to us. It would defeat some of the basic message of the gospel if natural theology was impossible, because there would be nothing to bring spiritual delight. It would be a completely different thing.
Yeah. So we won't spend too much time on natural theology, but are there any routes that we didn't go down that y'all would like to quickly discuss? Any conclusions?
God exists.
Amen.
That's a conclusion.
We can end with that. We can take a brief intermission here, and we'll be right back. 2 minutes. I think that was a good refresher. We'll jump right into the divine attributes. So does anybody want to break down that term, divine attributes?
I guess I can get into it a bit. So introducing, I guess, that sort of second stage, because a lot of times it's difficult to bridge the two, because we go and we prove the existence of God, and then most people are just like, oh, okay, natural theology done. Let's just pack it up, go home, nothing else to worry about. But that's not the case, because there's what's called a terminus to an argument. So the terminus to an argument is that sort of formal aspect of a thing that is proved. So when we ascend up through the 5 ways, the first 3 proving the existence of God, the last 2 proving the perfection of God, specifically the 4th one is proving the perfection of God by way of the entitative attributes, and the 5th proving the perfection of God by the way of the operative attributes. We have reached this sort of point up here, and that point is the judgment that God is ipsum esse per se subsistens. So what does that mean? That means that God is of himself, he is subsistent being, or he is his subsistent act of existence.
Mm-hmm.
So when it comes to everything else in the world, everything else from the highest angel to the lowest speck of dust is composed of essence and existence. So their existence is something which is contingent for them. So it's something which is not necessary. So they could exist, they couldn't exist, they can go out of existence. But for God, God's very essence is his existence. So for God, he is necessarily existent. And from that principle right there, that God is ipsum esse per se subsistence, we go from that high point, the terminus of the 5 ways, and then we kind of go on a downward slope, judging the rest of the way down and drawing certain arguments from that high point right there. Because if you think about it, if you'll stick with me for a second, when it comes to being is something which is transcendental. That means being is something that everything, insofar as it exists, is and has being. Because if something were something other than being, let's say if I said this ground black pepper can right here was being, yet this screwdriver right here was not being, then what would I be saying about the screwdriver if I said it was not being? What is something which is non-being? It would be something that doesn't exist, and therefore, how could I be predicating something to non-being? So everything, insofar as it is being. And if you look at the certain things that are being in relation to something else, so if you look at being in relation to the intellect, that's truth. Being in relation to the will, that's goodness. Being in relation to another being, it's called thing. Being in relation to itself, it's called unity. You have all of these perfections of being. So God, in making the judgment that he is ipsum esse per se subsistence, that I will just say from now on subsistent being, in judging that God is subsistent being, we can also make the judgment that he doesn't only have that perfection of being, but he has everything that goes along with it.
Mm-hmm.
So how many perfections is a subsistent being going to have? Is he let's think about it for a second. Actually, this is something very important for Dionysian theology. Divine Names, chapter 4, chapter 5, especially St. Thomas's lectures 1 through 3 are really good on this. So when it comes to perfection, oh, you do? Oh, fantastic. Fantastic! You need to definitely read that. You will be contemplating the divine essence in no time. So when it comes to, sorry, I lost my train of thought right there. When it comes to perfections, perfection is the lack of lack, if we may put it. It's the lack or absence of entitative lack. So it's something which is a negative name. So everything out there, insofar as it has being, is going to be something which is perfect. Because if you say that there is a perfection, that is somehow outside of being or not included in being, then you're being dumb, because then you're saying it doesn't exist. Again, you're always gonna fall in that claptrap. That's going to be St. Thomas's claptrap right there. You say there's something that is not included in a subsistent act of existence, and you're saying it doesn't exist, and therefore it's an imperfection, and we're negating it of God. So when we have verified that God is ipsum esse per se subsistence, everything else that is a perfection, since it is included in being somehow, is going to be included in God. So when we gaze around us, let's say I see, what is something?
Black pepper.
Yes, I will use my black pepper can again. So we have this black pepper can right here. This is a pretty beautiful black pepper can, right? Actually, I'll say it's a good black pepper can. It reasonably seasons my food. I will not be using this black pepper can for the next 40 days, unfortunately, but it has done me really good for these last few months. It's a good black pepper can. It is being in relation to my appetite. So when I contemplate the goodness of this black pepper can right here, I must see when I consider the notion of goodness, that it is something which is a pure perfection. So goodness does not include any sort of lack in its notion. It's only because goodness is instantiated in this black pepper can, because obviously this black pepper can isn't subsistent goodness, or it would be God. Mm-hmm. The lack that is present here isn't part of the notion, because we've already established that the notion of goodness is something which is something which doesn't include imperfection. Rather, it's due to the mode. So now we can't say that this black pepper can is essentially good, that it's part of its essence, because then its goodness wouldn't be at all mutable. If I cut a hole in the side of this black pepper can, it would be a less good black pepper can, and therefore, if it was part of the essence, this black pepper can would go out of existence, which is obviously not the case. So the raison d'etre for the goodness of this black pepper can, that is the reason for the being of the goodness of the black pepper can, must be found in another. And the effect, this is the principle of being, the effect must be included in the cause somehow, because you can't give what you don't have. So going back the sort of chain of reasoning, we can't have an infinite regress, because an infinite regress of that which receives something, a perfection from another, is never going to have it given to the chain. So it's just going to be a falling off. So reasoning from the goodness of this black pepper can, we can reason to subsistent goodness, which is going to be God. Now, when we look all around us to all of the pure perfections, we're going to be reasoning up to God formally having those perfections. And then on the other hand, if I look at this black pepper can again, and I consider it not under the aspect of a good black pepper can, but just under the aspect of a black pepper can, we see that the idea of black pepper canness, if you want to put it like that, the quiddity of black pepper cans, that it has to contain some sort of perfection. Because if it doesn't contain some sort of perfection, and we've already established that perfection is somehow an aspect of something insofar as it has being, we would say that this black pepper can doesn't exist, which is just ridiculous. So when it comes to the idea of black pepper can, it's going to have some sort of perfection present. But we can't think of the idea of an infinite black pepper can. That's just obviously ridiculous. Having all of the various perfections of being included in it. So we say, as we talked about the goodness of this, and we said that the goodness is something which is participated in it, something that's due not to the notion, but due to the manner in which it exists. When it comes to the idea of black pepper can, not only the manner of existence, but also the notion itself is imperfect.
Yeah.
So when we reason up to God, we're going to be reasoning differently. We're not going to say that black pepper can formally exist in God. That would just be ridiculous to say that God was a black pepper can or had the quiddity of black pepper canness. That would be utterly blasphemous. But we do say that God has the perfection, not formally, as I said before, but virtually. And when it comes to all of the attributes of God in natural theology, this is the way we're going to work. From the contemplation of the perfections of being in creatures to that perfection now existing in God, whether on the one hand formally or on the other hand virtually.
So y'all are a bit more knowledgeable on the subject. Where should we go from there?
Well, waiting for Christian to come back, I can just kind of say that part of what he presented is the idea that kind of at the very beginning, this idea that there's a gap between this. So, for instance, cosmological arguments for God's existence try to argue from some feature of the world, like that it changes or that it began to exist or that it's contingent to a necessary first cause. The gap would be, all right, we've got a first cause. Now, why does this first cause have to be God as classically conceived? So usually these arguments come in two stages. The first stage establishes God is the unmoved mover. He's the first cause. He's the unactualized actualizer. He's the necessary being. That's kind of stage one. And then stage two is, all right, now why does this necessary first cause have to resemble God as we know, the various omni attributes and so forth? And yeah, so that's where you can sort of bifurcate natural theology into this kind of stage one and stage two. So stage one's like, okay, the existence of this first cause. Stage two is, what is this first cause like? What attributes does it have? But yeah, I guess that's all I would add by way of clarification. I think Christian did a marvelous job of breaking it all down.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a bit over my head, so I'm not really sure of where to go. I don't want to jump too far ahead, but we were talking a bit before the show about the act of existence versus existence. So could you explain that? Yeah, essence. Could you explain that distinction?
Yeah. So Christian, I think I already explained this a little bit, but you can think of it as being essence is what something is. Existence is that something is. So, for instance, I can give you an essence of a unicorn, right? I can specify what it would be for a unicorn to exist, but unicorns don't actually exist. So we can make a distinction between the act of existence and an essence.
Yeah.
In God, in God and in God alone, his act of existence, that he is, and his essence, what he is, are identical. And that's what Christian was saying, that God is ipsum ipse subsistence. I think Christian had it, ipsum esse per se subsistence, right?
Yeah. Yes, ipsum esse per se subsistence.
Not a Latin speaker. Yeah, so in God and in God alone, those two are identical. And everything else, they come apart. They're distinct. Now, within Catholicism, there is an in-house debate over the nature of that distinction between, for instance, Thomists and Scotists on that issue. Probably we would be best if we don't get into that. That would kind of...
Yeah, especially considering the Scotists are wrong.
I agree. But don't tell Byzantine that.
I'll tell Gideon that all day. I've been telling him that for a year and a half now.
So yeah.
Yeah, the divine name. I completely forgot about that. Duh. So yeah, there's actually a classic exegetical support to this, and that's that when God revealed his name, he revealed him as I am, which is a different way of saying ipsum esse per se subsistence. Thomism only streams, so true.
It's Exodus 3:14 there.
Yeah, and yes, definitely the sort of so yeah, we already went over kind of when it comes to deriving from the pure perfections of being, and then mixed perfections, which are virtually present in God. But another important aspect that sort of needs to be covered in a meta treatment, because unfortunately we're not going to be able to get into all of the attributes distinctly. That would take a bit. But also the concept of analogy, which is going to be one of the most important and unique aspects of the Thomistic way of thinking about God. And it's sort of the problem is stated thus, is when it comes to creatures and God, our concepts can't be purely different. So when I say God is wise, and I say Hasan is wise,
of course.
Yes, of course. Obviously, I'm not just speaking nonsense. I'm not using two words with utterly no connection. Well, two terms that have no connections in their concepts. And like if I said the wall is white and James's last name is White, the only thing shared by those two instances of white is the verbal enunciative sound. That's the only thing that's shared by them. So obviously our language can't be of this first sort. Now, on the other hand, we could think that terms are purely overlapping in their concepts. So if I said I have human nature and I said Hasan is human nature, I am, with my language, denoting a certain form that both Hasan and I share, because Hasan and I are specifically identical. We're of the same species. The terms that we're using for that are what are called univocal. The concept is the same. Now, it can't be like this either between us and God, because we would be saying that there would be a certain attribute that would be identical in concept between creator and creature, which obviously can't be the case. So how do we kind of cut this Gordian knot? And what St. Thomas is going to say, and this is perfected by Thomas de Vio Cajetan in his work on the analogy of names, what he's going to say is, when I have the name of God is wise on the other hand, and Hasan is wise on the other hand, I have two distinct notions. And these two distinct notions are designating two different natures. So in this sense, the terms are equivocal. The terms are designating two different natures. But between those two terms, there's what's called a unity of proportionality. So what the heck is a unity of proportionality? So let's think of it this way. We have 2:4 as 8:16. So 2 and 4 different natures. I guess if you want to put it like that, different natures. And then 8 and 16 different natures. But they share something. What do they share? They share their proportion between one another. So Hasan's act of wisdom and God's act of wisdom, while they are something which are equivocal when it comes to the nature that the terms are designating, they have two said to be perfect notions. They have a unity by way of proportionality, and therefore have one imperfect notion. So that is going to be something very important when we consider all of the terms that we use about God. It's going to often be I don't want to say hidden, but it is in a certain sense hidden under a few of these layers of analogy. And then also, on the other hand, we have a lot of language of metaphor, which I guess we can get in after this.
Yeah. Anything to add to that, Colin?
One thing I would want to add on the very last note with metaphor is that in general, when we talk about analogical predications, we don't mean non-literal. With metaphorical, that is what we're talking about. So when we say that God is angry, for instance. But in general, when we say that God has power, we don't mean like, we're just figuratively speaking, he has power. No, he literally has power. It's just not exactly the same as what power is in us. So I just wanted to make that clear, because a lot of people when they hear analogical, they think non-literal, and that's not right.
Yeah. And actually, this is I feel like, and this is actually why I'm a huge Plato.
I think you froze there. Yeah. We didn't hear you.
Okay, good. I'm back.
Fan of.
Okay, I would say I'm a huge Plato fan. I'm a huge Plato fan because the way that a lot of people think of it, and this is kind of a bit of a vice, I guess, of some popular fans of Thomism. The way they're going to view it is they're going to think, and I guess this is how I express it, just because it's easier to explain pedagogically this way. But I look in front of me. There's a certain perfection here. And that perfection is analogously in God. No, that's not how St. Thomas describes it. The way St. Thomas describes it, what's called the primary analog, is God. So actually, that perfection is in God. You just kind of share in God's perfection. God has being more than all beings have being. He is super being. He's before all being and above all being and being itself. He is more being. He's the being of beings of being.
Mm-hmm.
We, on the other hand, we merely reflect a shadow of being. We're just kind of being. So God, he has the fullness of perfect and subsistent wisdom. We just kind of are allowed to have a little bit of shadow to it. And you get this in the writings of St. Augustine. I've been reading De Vera Religione. I feel like I've been reading it for a while because I think I've been saying this for weeks. So I should probably finish it up. But you see the way in which St. Augustine describes reality. It's really fascinating. Is that as you sort of depart from God, who is being itself, and that in whom we have our being. Being is our participated perfection in us from God. As we depart from God and are sort of dragged down by our own vices and turned away from our last end, we actually become less real. It is really we since we experience material things more, we think that the material is the more real. And in the sort of the spirit world is kind of floaty up there. Well, no, actually, the spirit world, as things get closer to God, that's the heavy stuff. we're barely hanging on at the edges of the realm of existence right now. God, as the center of existence, is the center point. And then around him, in sort of the Dionysian celestial hierarchy framework, is the choirs of angels and the blessed saints who have the beatific vision, and they go all the way back down to the church, and then the unbelievers, the rest of creation, blah blah blah. But all this is to say is, as we depart from God, we actually become less of what God is, which is the supreme and simple, formal, subsistent act of being that recapitulates all perfections in himself, and we are merely giving a little bit of shine to the intense brilliance that is the divine essence. So we're really the less real ones. We're the kind of fake ones who are a bit artificial, but God really is being itself.
Yeah. So what does that make of people in hell? Are they even less real than we are? Or is there?
Oh yeah, they are on the edge of nothingness, which I think there's a reflection to that, but the annihilationists might get a bit mad at you.
I mean, they're not people at the moment either.
That's true. They aren't people.
Neither are the souls in heaven, though.
So true.
I should say that is contested. Just
By wrong people.
They're wrong. They're so wrong. That's such by Thomas. I mean, the Thomas who contested are wrong.
Yeah, but they pretty much all of the traditional authors are going to agree with St. Thomas on this, especially since like St. Thomas and Blessed Scotus both held this position. It's kind of weird to edge out from there, and there's a lot of things that make a lot less sense scripturally. St. Thomas makes some of these points in the Sentences commentary.
Yeah. So I think we kind of went down a tangent there. Where were we at before that? Where do we leave off? Where do we need to start again?
Yeah, where are we? Yeah, I guess we're talking about kind of like some prolegomena to the attributes of God. I guess we could talk about usually the next topic that's discussed is the distinction between the attributes. So, could you say that God is not just wise but wisdom itself? Yes. So this is something really, really, really fun that Thomas is going to talk about. Hounds of Justice is the difference between abstract and concrete naming when it comes to God. So have you ever noticed throughout sacred scripture, and then also throughout the liturgy and throughout tradition, and kind of just the way that Catholics intuitively think about God, and the way in which the saints talk about God, we kind of have this difficulty. Sometimes we want to speak in what are called abstract terms. So God is wisdom. And sometimes we want to speak in concrete terms, that God is wise. So concrete terms, the good thing about concrete terms is that they signify something which is subsistent. But the bad thing about concrete terms is it usually is designating something that is participated. So if I talk about a wise man, the wise man, he has the participated perfection of wisdom, but he isn't wisdom itself. Now, on the other hand, we can speak in abstract terms. Abstract terms, they're great because they designate what's called a simple form. And the simple form is going to be something which does not have any admixture of anything else. But the bad thing is that something which is a abstract and simple form isn't something which is subsisting. So what we have to do, and this is really fun, is we have to constantly think in both terms. So we think that God is both wisdom and that God is wise. God is both good and God is both goodness. God is both living and God is both life. We have to constantly think of both terms because we don't have this joining together of the abstract and the concrete names. Rather, we have to recognize that God is both a simple form and is subsisting, and not merely something that exists conceptually in the intellect as a being of second intention. But where were we? Distinction between the attributes.
Yeah.
Does anybody want to unknot that fun topic?
If we just drop this one very simple thing that's a little more visual for people to kind of understand. We recently brought up St. Augustine's approbation of Tertullian's weird language about God's body, right?
Yeah.
This is kind of useful because when we speak about God having like a natural body, we don't mean like a mobile body. We mean in the sense of like there being like actual visualities in God that are actually distinct from one another. And this is all only to say that God is something, right? He's not just like any of real predications, right? That's the point, that there are actual visualities in God.
Yeah, because really a corporeal body is going to be less real and less metaphysically weighty than a virtual quantity ever will be. So, we still need to kind of get into metaphorical versus proper language. So when we kind of do the analogy thing, we always have to do the analogy thing. Like no matter what, we're not going to be able to find something that is going to univocally be able to be predicated of God and creatures. But also, what's really fun is, and this is something that gets talked about all over in the tradition, is that we have difficulty. I don't know if you've noticed from the last hour, but we kind of have difficulty when it comes to thinking and speaking about God. Yeah. So imagine if you were let's say, a 7th century BC
caveman
preacher, preacher trying to preach to what amounts to cavemen. You're trying to preach to the common man, and you're trying to explain God to them. So when you have to explain God to more or less regular people, and this is something that we all should get into practice with, because a lot of times there's regular people, while they're not able to articulate it, they know God a lot better than you do. But when you speak to them about God, you have to use images that are common to them, and this is called language which is appropriated. So, for example, when my son is, 3, 4, 5 years old, and he starts asking questions about the way in which Mass works, and he asks, he might point to the priest and say, "Oh, is that Jesus up there?" I will tell him yes, because in a certain sense, he is another Christ. He is somebody representing Christ on earth in his ministerial priesthood. So I will tell my son that person up there is Jesus. Am I saying something which is false? No, I'm not saying something which is false. Am I saying something which is proper? That is, which represents all of the formalities of the situation? No, the priest up there isn't quantitatively the second person of the Trinity. No, of course not. That's ridiculous. But in a certain formal aspect, he kind of is, in that he shares in his priesthood. So when it comes to the naming of God to people, we have to go through this process of appropriation. So you'll see throughout different points in Scripture, you're going to get different language that is appropriated. Sometimes God is described as angry. Now, let's take that phrase of God's anger, because that's usually the most controversial one, because a lot of people, for some reason, like to obsess over the fact that God is angry. And if we say that that's actually something which is metaphorical, they think we're somehow liberalizing. But that's not the case. When we think of the notion of anger, is the notion of anger something which is a pure perfection, or is it a mixed perfection? Well, it's something which is a mixed perfection, because anger in us and amongst creatures, and if you want more on this, the end of, I think it's book 1 of Summa Contra Gentiles, starting about 90, 1 to the end, talks about all the passions of God and all the controversy surrounding that. But if you think of anger, you're going to realize that there's certain imperfections to it. For one, it's a passion. And passions are going to are going to require some sort of mutability, and therefore we're going to have to exclude them from God. On the other hand, usually when we talk about anger, we're going to be talking about something which has as its object an evil. Or we may even think about something like sadness. I think that's actually a more interesting one. It's thinking about divine sadness. What does it mean for God to be sad? Scripture talks about God being sad, but what does that mean? We're going to have to negate the imperfections in our created notion. So we're going to have to negate that it's a passion. We're going to have to negate sadness usually has to do with some sort of present evil, or even something like fear, which has to do with a future evil. We're going to have to negate that aspect when it comes to God. And the solution that St. Thomas comes to when it comes to fear, this is the interesting one actually, is it's going to be God's sort of root affection of love towards his people that have a future evil that will come to them. And in thinking about this, in purifying the notion, then we're going to take it and then we're going to kind of shoot it up. So we're going to say, okay, God, he doesn't have in the proper sense, let's say fear, or because that might sound blasphemous to some ears, I'll say sadness. Because God doesn't in the proper sense have sadness, but rather in the metaphorical sense, we're going to say that God isn't sad. But since the perfections present in the notion of sadness are present in God after negation, we're going to say that God is both not sad, and God is the saddest being ever to exist. And that may sound to freshman ears to be horrific. But if you read the sort of logic behind St. Thomas Aquinas and the divine naming through his commentary on Dionysius, and also Summa Contra Gentiles, Summa Theologiae, commentary on the sentences, De Potentia, all the various places, he talks about this a lot. So there's just a lot of material to go through. And I've been going through a lot of this material over the last few months myself.
Yeah.
You're going to see that that the notion that sort of gets presented in a lot of classical theist circles of God as some sort of like block of ice in the sky is absolutely wrong.
Mm-hmm.
Really, we are the metaphysical blocks of ice down here below. God really has all that we have, yet in their perfected notions, in a most eminent manner, above anything in which we could imagine. So when the little old lady in church says God hates sin, she has a perfect intuition of exactly the truth. And a lot of times with their hours and hours and hours over years and years of communion with God, they're going to have a much more perfect notion of these things than we're going to be able to go by the negative way. And it's really, really fantastic that a lot of these things are able to be appropriated to us by human language. They actually mean things. So a lot of times, unfortunately, classical theists can become detached from the text of Scripture and the person of Jesus Christ. But really, the more you kind of look into it, you see that the nature of God is most manifest to us in the incarnation of our Lord Jesus Christ and in his crucifixion. Mm-hmm. That's where divine mercy and divine justice becomes manifest to us. This becomes very clear in St. Thomas's commentary on the Gospel of John. But yeah, that's sort of my little rant session about some of the stuff I despise within some classical theist circles.
Yeah, so could you also say the same, that the incarnation was the manifestation of love in the most comprehensible form to us?
Yes, it's the manifestation of we can say divine sadness too, if you want to put it like that. Although again, some people are probably feeling very uncomfortable with speaking of divine sadness, but it's something that St. Thomas talks about, and you can read what he says. But for example, our Lord Jesus Christ weeping over Jerusalem, his weeping over Jerusalem, it actually communicates to us how God relates to us in our stubbornness and sin. Mm-hmm. Now we have to perfect that notion, and that's where a lot of the sort of process theologian types, divine The sort of almost crypto patripassianist types are going to get it wrong. Is they're going to say actually God properly has passions, and not in a metaphorical sense, but they're going to think metaphorical means fake. But metaphorical doesn't mean fake. Actually, in this sense, metaphorical means more real. God more really and perfectly has the passion of sadness than we could ever expect. Our sadness looks like no sadness compared to his.
Well, just another curious question, not to get sidetracked here.
Yeah.
So you could say that God is love, but you can't say that God is sadness. Why is that?
You actually so the reason, okay, I just kind of go back to concrete versus abstract names.
Mhm.
So sorry, my mom is texting me right now, so it distracted me in the corner. So yes, always remember to text your moms. They will appreciate it.
Yeah.
But when it comes to abstract names, so we say God is love because love is a certain, actually it's a certain perfection of the will, and will is a certain perfection of the operation of a being. So it's something which is a sort of crypto transcendental perfection. So we can say in that sense that love is going to become identical with the second act of being within the operative line. So we'll say that God is self-subsisting love in that sense, just as we would say that God is self-subsisting intellection and so on and so forth.
Mhm.
So actually, when it comes to the predication of the passion of love to God, we can say that God is sadness because is used in many different senses. And sadness, it's sort of like the Jordan Peterson meme, like what do you mean by God? What do you mean by is? What do you mean by sadness? Like it's legitimately that's what theologians who deal with data uno have to do all the time. It's like, okay, yes, we can say God is sadness, but what do you mean by is? What do you mean by sadness? What do you mean by God? I mean, if you're talking about the second person of the Trinity by God, then yes, we can predicate sadness of him according to his humanity. There's that sort of is a whole different sidetrack. But yeah, language is really funny. But yes, we can say that. But we could also say that God is not sadness. If you want to speak by is in the sense of a proper predication. But if you want to talk about is in the sense of a predication that would envelop both proper predications and then also metaphorical predications, then no. But usually by is we talk about proper predication. So I would stick away from that language unless you're going to give the last 20 minutes of explanation that I just gave.
Yeah. So I don't want to skip over too much stuff, but we didn't get to divine simplicity yet. Is that something y'all wanted to tackle? It's a bit of a big topic right there.
It's fun. Yeah, usually that's gonna if somebody else wanted to sort of dive into divine simplicity.
I can, unless Hasan, you really wanted to. Okay. So what? Sorry.
Take us away.
Oh, okay. So divine simplicity, the basic idea is that God is an absolutely metaphysically simple being. He's not composite in any way. He doesn't have any kind of parts. So there's no distinction in God between his essence and his existence. There's no distinction between his attributes. And that's actually one of the big reasons why we must speak of God analogically. Because in us, our power, our wisdom, and so forth are distinct properties in us. In God, they're all identical.
Mm-hmm.
And so, well, if you understand predications univocally, that doesn't make any sense, right? Because I mean, power just isn't the same thing as knowledge and so forth. But in God, we're saying, well, I mean, God is his power, he is his knowledge, he is his wisdom. All of these things are just identical with the divine essence itself. But when we as finite intellects contemplate God, we can draw out these kind of distinct things that we can predicate about this simple divine essence. So yeah, the basic idea is just that God is not composed of parts in any way. Now we probably won't want to get into how to make sense of that with respect to the Trinity. I mean, that's a whole nother can of worms. But yeah, that's the basic idea. And the rationale for it, I should say as well, dogmatically, simplicity was defined at Lateran IV and reaffirmed at Vatican I. With that being said, there are different ways to understand simplicity within Catholicism. There's the Thomistic understanding, there's a Scotist understanding, and both of those understandings are within the bounds of orthodoxy. I myself find the Thomistic understanding more plausible because it seems to be a stronger notion of simplicity. And philosophically, kind of the rationale for simplicity is the idea that simplicity is necessary for securing God's ultimacy in his aseity. So that's another kind of attribute that usually goes hand in hand with simplicity. So aseity means that God is of or from himself, that he is completely independent of any other being. You see this biblically expressed in the first chapter of John, where John goes through and basically says, through the word, all things were created. Well, now I'm blanking on precisely how John says it, but anyway, you see aseity kind of expressed in John 1, and the basic idea is that if God were composed of parts, then there would have to be some sort of explanation over and above God for why those parts are arranged in just the way that they are, rather than some other way. So if you have these parts that have arrangement 1, you might ask, well, why don't they have arrangement 2? I mean, what explains that fact? And so anything that's composed requires some sort of explanation outside of itself to account for why it's composed in just that way. And so because God is the ultimate explanation, he doesn't have any explanation outside of himself, he can't be composed in any way. He has to be totally simple. And then with simplicity, I don't know if Christian will agree with this or not, but I sort of think simplicity is in some ways like the most fundamental attribute, as far as you can almost derive all the other attributes from simplicity by itself. I mean, immediately from simplicity follows immutability and timelessness, because if there's no parts, right, in order for a composite object to change, right, it changes its parts in some way. It changes the arrangement of the parts, it changes the number of parts, something along those lines. Well, since God's absolutely simple, he doesn't have any parts, and so he can't change. And from the fact that he can't change, he's timeless. To be in time is to be subject to change and succession. Then, I mean, I guess I'll just stop there.
Yeah, with that notion, I think so. I would agree with that in a qualified sense. So I think the most fundamental attribute, which is classically called the metaphysical essence, so that's the metaphysical essence of God. By metaphysical means notional. So that sort of that which we know as, or at least that which within our thinking, is that most fundamental attribute of God. I would say it would be that God's essence and existence are really identical, which is going to be the sort of height of simplicity, actually, is that judgment right there. Because, I mean, if his essence and existence are identical, then nothing else in God is composed. Because that is the dividing line right there between God and creatures. Because even the angels do not have a composition of matter and form, or of genus and species. But the angels still have a composition of essence and existence. So, and I actually wanted to comment on something you said real quick. So while you were, I don't know if this was intentional or if you slipped up, but you said that there's no distinction in God.
No real distinction.
Okay, good. I'm assuming that's what you meant. Okay,
yeah.
Okay. But yeah. I think that's actually something important to reflect on when it comes to the nature of distinction, because a lot of times when people approach divine simplicity, this is always something that I have a lot of fun talking with people about. It's kind of like the development doctrine for me. It's something that is spoken about a lot, but a lot of times people don't know where to go to kind of look for it. So a lot of people are groping in the dark. And once you explain it to them, they're like, oh, okay, that makes a lot of sense, actually. So when it comes to the distinction between the attributes, and I'll try to find some semi-entertaining stuff to illustrate this with. But you have, broadly speaking, two types of distinction. So you can have, on the one hand, distinction which is objective. So, for example, the distinction between my body and soul. That is something which is on the part of the object of me. Without any sort of mind to consider me, my body and soul would still be different things. And on the other hand, we can have a subjective distinction. So a subjective distinction is going to be a distinction that exists in the intellect. Now, when it comes to distinctions that exist in the intellect, there's actually two types of ways we can think about it. And this is sort of the way that a lot of people have trouble trying to parse out. And this is actually where the SCOTUS formal distinction will come in, which I think is the exact same as one of the type of distinctions I'm about to talk about. But on the one hand, you can have a distinction which is called a distinction of reasoning. So there's a distinction that's purely on the part of the intellect. For example, the distinction I have between man and rational animal. Man and rational animal are the same exact concept. They just differ as more or less precise. One's a name, one's a real definition. But on the other hand, we can actually have something that's a distinction of reasoned, also known commonly as a conceptual or a virtual distinction. So that's going to be a distinction which exists in the intellect. Without an intellect, the distinction wouldn't happen. But the distinction has some sort of foundation in the thing. So, for example, my animality, my rationality is called my genus. My rationality is called my specific difference. And together they form my quiddity. So my animality, my rationality, you can't look at me and sort of grab out my animality and grab out my rationality and say, okay, here's my animality, here's your rationality. They're right here. No, the distinction is on the part of my intellect. But the important thing here, and yes, I don't know why I have a pair of child scissors in my hand, but this is what I'm using. But I can't snip my rationality, my animality, and separate them out. They're objectively identical. They're the same object. They're the same quiddity. They're the same me. But the concepts aren't the same. You can't say rationality equals animality. That'd be utterly ridiculous. They're completely different concepts. But they're not just nominally. They're not nominally distinct. There's something between something which is purely objective and purely subjective. So within this sort of middle distinction that I've made for you guys, there's two types of distinctions there as well. There's what's called a major virtual distinction. So that would be like the relationship actually between my animality, my rationality, because my rationality is a certain complementary perfection of my animality. They relate to each other in that way. On the other hand, we have what's called a minor virtual distinction, or some of the philosophers will call it an imperfectly prescinded virtual distinction. Yeah. So with this, they relate as explicit and implicit. So we can think of it like this. So you have one of the crystals you get, and you shine a light through the crystal, and you get all of the lights on the outside. Now, let's say that the crystals are intellects, and the pure white light is the divine essence in which we're contemplating, and the sort of lights coming out of the back of our mind is going to be all of those concepts that we have of the divine essence, because due to the imperfection of our intellects, not due to anything when it comes to any sort of imperfection in God, but due to the imperfection of our intellects, we name God by many concepts. And in these concepts, just as the various lights of the rainbow are contained in the white light, and they correspond to it, the names of God aren't synonymous. St. Thomas clearly says this. The names of God are real. They are proper. There's something that corresponds within God when we say that God is wise or God is just. There's a famous sentence that's commonly brought up by the Thomists that God does not punish by his mercy or or pardoned by his justice. Rather, they are something that really corresponds to God. But it's something that still exists in our intellect with only approximate foundation in God, due to the imperfection of our intellect. So the various rays of our concepts are found within God in a more eminent and then also simple manner that they are contained, that we will not be able to interact with until we have the beatific vision. And as it says, I think in the prophet Zechariah, and in that day, God will have one name rather than the many sort of various concepts we give him.
Yeah. So, any concluding thoughts? We're coming on an hour and a half here. I think we hit about everything that we wanted to. Is that correct? We didn't leave out anything important?
I don't think so. I guess the Trinity and divine simplicity thing would have been cool.
Yeah, there's always room for a part 2. Always time for a part 2. But yeah, we can wrap it up right here unless y'all got any concluding thoughts.
Unless you wanted to try to squeeze in like a couple more attributes, but otherwise, yeah, I'm fine.
I'm fine.
Yep. So I guess we'll do the shout outs. So Christian, where can the viewers find you?
They can find me if you go on YouTube, look at Scholastic Answers. That's me. Or Twitter. I have some pretty good threads.
Yeah, and you also have a website.
I do have a website, christianbwagner.com.
Yep. So Colin, you have a blog. That's your main outlet.
Yeah, I've got a very humble blog with an incredible 6 followers. One of which is my mother. Yeah, so it's catholicareopagus.blogspot.com. The formal title of the blog is A Catholic in the Areopagus. And it's just kind of a hodgepodge of philosophy, theology, and apologetics. Yeah.
All right, Hasan, you got anything?
Not really. I'm not really a guy with a platform. I'm just friends with a bunch of people. That's pretty much my thing.
Yeah, he's on the infamous Saturday morning show though. So
yeah.
So
for some reason, I'm assumed to be a regular guest at this point.
Yeah, so that's where the viewers will find Hasan on Christian's YouTube channel.
Or if you go anywhere on Catholic Discord.
Yeah, he's all over the place. But all right, win with this.
Oh God!
All right, roll the outro.
Oh my goodness, dude! Come on.